Today we're going to see if anti-gravity will help us solve our problem, or will we just float away? We've seen a bunch of times how we can use anti-gravity to build out a brand new application. But how good is it at debugging one that isn't working? So here I have one I've started. It was working at one point. When I refresh it, I get an error. What I'm expecting to see is for it to show me any tickets that are labeled user request, but it's not doing it. So let's see if we can see if there's any errors. The log files for Docker show me nothing. So if I do Docker logs, I get a 304, but that's all I know. So what I am going to say is I'm going to bring up anti-gravity. You see I've already launched it, and I've updated it because it had some new versions. And I'm going to say this app is not working. I see in the Docker logs returned 302, 304 error, and when loading, the web page says, let's capture that. So we're going to be using Gemini 3 Pro High and in planning mode. Actually, I'm not going to do plan. I'm going to say fix it. This time I'm going to do fix it. I usually do plan. This time I want to say go ahead and just fix the thing. So over here it discovered that a file wasn't being loaded. And what it's suggesting is we change up the order of things. And we can see it starting to do a diff. So if I do a diff here, we have a getim function that takes in a key. If we're not a type of window, then I return the runtime config key. Otherwise, I import it from the meta-env. Okay. So now we're at its conclusion. It says the issues that the Docker container is serving the application is static using serve, which does not support proxy and Vite. Hence the API requests are going to index, and I get the thing. So they've done a runtime config strategy with a variable. I'm going to say accept all. Only I like to do things with Docker. Docker PS. Let's go ahead and kill this Fixin status page. Should be able to do a Docker build. Well, I'm going to give it a new number. We'll say Docker build 02. Oh, forgot the dot. So now it's going to build a new container image locally. And now I can run that. Fixin status name 02. That's the new label. That's what I called it, right? Yep, 02. Now it's fired up. So let's see if this worked. We're going to move that out of the way. Move that out of the way. It is not looking good. No, it is not a caching thing. So let's go try this all over again. So I'm going to give it that new error and note that my Docker logs don't show any errors. So I'm going to let it go crank away for a bit. Alright. The error confirms the API is between HTML to JSON is missing a environment variable. So those things, this will make the fix. So we'll do accept all. Let's give it a try. Let's do this. Export for equals 03, and we'll plan to stop and remove the current one and build the next one with that variable of ver, and then we'll run it. Kind of a nice one-stop shop to do all the steps. There you go. So you stop it, kill it, build it, run it. All right, let's give that a try. That's a new one. And I'm not really seeing a log to help me with it. One thing I'm going to do different this time is I'm going to give it the full console log, right? So I see there's a cores issue, which isn't good. And then I see that we have some API things. I think the cores issue might be the underlying problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up Antigravity again. Or I see on Firefox it's slightly different. And then what I'm going to say is the console is showing a cores error. Perhaps we need to address this. The other error I see in the console, though it may be related to cross-object requests, is... Alright, that's a lot of debug, right? So I've now pumped it full of stuff I want it to try, right? I'm going to give it a chance to kind of come up. It wants to add some middleware. Oh. I'm going to go ahead and run that in WSL because I found it doesn't work as hot on PowerShell. So I got that saved. Alright, did a bunch of changes. Now I'm getting a little nervous, but I did give it a lot of errors. So let's go ahead and see if that worked. So we will go call this version 4. Now part of what I'm going to do next is if this doesn't work, I'm going to want to ask it to put a lot more debug in there and see if I can figure it out myself, because this should be a standard RESTful API. Alright, so it's done here. Oh, that's even worse. You can see the Docker containers actually crashing, so I'm going to chase that. No, while I'm still iterating on it, it still isn't working. This time I'm going to say, can you add debug output that would show in the console that might help us debug any future issues, or debug output in the Docker logs. So I'm going to ask here is I just want it to be a little more verbose so that we can figure out what the heck's going on. Now I want to talk about where we get. So eventually you find yourself just in infinite loops. I'm not getting anywhere. I'm getting the same errors and it keeps trying similar things. And because I've checked my code and before I ever went down this path, I can see all the files have changed. Big rewrites, okay? Now we could keep trying to vibe code our way down this rabbit hole, but there gets to be a point where you need to stop. Now I checked the most obvious thing, which is my token expired? Because that can get real quick and it won't expire for a bit. So that's, the token is good. So what I'm gonna do now is take a pause. I'm gonna say get status. We've had a lot of package changes. What I'm going to do is get checkout-b. This was not working, okay? And I do want to save it. Maybe I can come back to this later. So I'm going to do get add we get ignore? Okay, that is supposed to be there. Okay. Do git add dash A. I'll do git add. Git commit still busted with 401s. Okay. So now I'm going to git checkout master. Okay, and everything's reset. In fact, I just watched my terminal refresh here. Okay. So here you can see I've come back to how it was before I ever made Docker files, before I tried to get down the path of getting it fancy, and it was working right then. Okay. So I'm going to go down a different path now. I'm going to stop the dev server, which is running in Vite. What I'm going to say here is a new session, new conversation. We're starting over, okay? And sometimes you just got to do this. It's not fun, but you got to do this. And we got to say, I have a Vite-based JavaScript web app. I would like a Docker file that will build and serve on port 3030. Please update the readme.md with steps. Please make sure to consider any CORS issues that may arise. The .env should be mounted to the container, not copied in, because I want to be able to externalize this later. Make sure to add any necessary debug output. All right, so we're starting over, right? I tried to make the one that was working go. It didn't. I went back to master where I had at least a running system locally. Now I'm going to kind of give it a new task. And it's important to do a new conversation, so we kind of clear the context window and give it an all new path to work on. And knowing that we had some issues with the React or the cores before, I'm kind of calling that out in advance. So again, what I'm trying to get at here is you can go down a path, and if it just keeps getting worse and worse and you find yourself in a circular rabbit hole and adding new packages that don't make sense, and the code gets beyond to where you can understand, I'll speak for myself before beyond where I can understand. That's where I say stop, start over, right? And think about it like an intern, like a really smart intern, where if you just let them rabbit hole, they can go down the path. Maybe we all did that when we were younger in our career. This is the same thing. You got to sometimes pause and say, let's start over. Let's rethink our requirements and go back to the beginning. So I can see it's done some new index page. Now I want to circle back to the end here because I debugged this for a while. And I redid this for a while. And the end result is that this is a consequence of mixing file systems. My config file, when I hopped in there, and I will show you since I will just need to rotate my API key, it was ending in a control M. It was a Windows carriage return line feed. The moment I did a DOS to Unix to convert that over to a Unix file, I stopped getting the 401 errors. The whole problem here ultimately was the .env file, whether I was talking about the last version I did this or the one I've just redone, had a mix of Windows and Linux. And this is kind of a problem sometimes you get with Windows subsystem for Linux when I'm working in a Windows. Look, I'm in a Windows file path. I should have stayed in Linux. I wouldn't have had this issue. But I had to get in there. And the way I did is I started to go into the logs. I'll just show you. I started to go into the logs and see, no matter what I said, it kept doing a new line here. I'm like, there isn't a new line. And then that would create a config file error. And the config file error would then go ahead and cause the rest of it to fall down. And so I was hopping in the container to figure that out. And so ultimately, by execing into the container and checking it, that was how I figured out that it had a bad entry. Now we can check that the container is good now. Obviously it is because it's running. If I do docker ps, do docker exec-it, Vicunja status, bin sh, and can't remember the exact point, so I'll just look at here, go into here. Now my config file has a proper end. And so the token was coming through before I saw Control M here. So this is the big thing to pay attention to, is steps like that. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a note that before we do an env file, I'm going to say it was fine on Windows. When we did the Docker is where we really saw it. Note, the .env file needs to use Linux line feeds so that it is properly put into the Nginx path on the container by the Docker setup, Docker entry point script. I recommend using DOS to Unix to ensure proper line endings. Now we have a note, and we're good. Now obviously my next step will be to rotate that token, but we now have a working solution. I'm now kind of curious how much token usage I use in Vertex for all this, because it kind of will tell me how expensive did this get. I do not see it showing up yet in my report, so what I will do is I will come back to this video and do a screenshot and voiceover to talk about how expensive. I would not imagine it's very expensive, though. I found pretty good usage of tokens through Antigravity. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you'll see the app soon. Bye. I wanted to come back and review the costs. It was nothing. So little it didn't even register. I've turned off all of my discounts too, so just to make sure we see actual costs. So it was like 5 cents for all those Vertex talking in the Gemini Pro. And if I look at the AI Studio, because sometimes I use my API key, this is an aberration. This was a day I did something silly. But November 27th, which was Thanksgiving morning, when I recorded all this, no usage. So I know it didn't come through the Gemini API here. I know on my billing for the last couple days, a nickel. So incredibly cheap. And I do want to say that for this work, Google Cloud gave me some cloud credits, but as you can see, didn't even use them. Even the video of me flying up in the beginning, I used my personal Gemini Pro account for that. So just pointing out, 5 cents for all that banging away. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you learned something. I sure did. And we'll see you on the next one.